Welcome to the Texas Business Broker, where we bring you industry insights from business brokers and exit professionals. So whether you're a business broker, an M&A professional, or a business owner, this podcast is your go-to resource for insights for top industry professionals. I'm your host, Josh Carnes with Line Business Advisors, and I'm currently serve as the Vice President of the Texas Association of Business Brokers. In this episode, we are chatting with Dan Altom, owner of Sunbelt Texas. We're going to dive into his journey of owning a business brokerage firm here in Texas and the lessons that he has learned along the way. Dan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thanks, Josh. Pleasure to be here.
Perfect. Why don't you start? Tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about Sunbelt Texas, and what you have going on there in Houston.
Sure. Well, Houston's great, so that's good. So Dan Altom with Sunbelt Business Brokers. We're national franchise. I own the Houston markets. I'm the third owner of the franchise, actually. So we've been around for 30 some odd years. And you'd think we'd know how many deals we'd close, but that seems to be lost to obscurity. So we're guessing it's around 1,000. We've got a team of about 10 brokers here in town with all kinds of experience, longevity. They do a lot of deals. Trying to think of what else. I got into business about 6 years ago. I bought the practice and came on as a partner. Before that, I'd actually been, I'm not just the president, I'm a client. I bought several businesses through the Sunbelt practice. And so when I got done doing all that, they made me an offer I couldn't refuse and came on board to become the managing partner.
Perfect. And I that's kind of the core of what we wanted to talk about today is really your journey into that. So let's start right there. What was that moment where you transitioned from being a client to a business broker? How did that look?
Yeah, sure. So, I graduated from Texas A&M with a finance degree and went to work for a CPA. And my job there was as valuation and securities transactions. And so I'd just been around that for a while. And then even though I'd promised everyone that I knew that I wasn't going to be an entrepreneur like my parents and family, somehow it found me anyways. And so started and acquired and then ended up selling several businesses and worked closely with the Sunbelt office over a period of probably 10 years. We did several deals together and just got to know the previous managing partner, whose name is Dan as well. So I'm Dan 2.0. He never appreciates that. But just got to know him really well. And, it kind of was in my wheelhouse of, I've been doing small business transactions or valuation work for, almost 20 years at that point. And so it just kind of made sense with what I was up to. And I was in a place in life where I could kind of take on that hunter-killer mode of you eat what you kill kind of deal, which is a pretty big bite to take off in this industry with the long sales cycles and those kinds of things. So we worked out a deal, and it was probably all the things that, we would never tell our clients to do from a transaction standpoint and made it work. And so here we are.
Once you did that, what did that transition period look like where you actually stepped in and became managing director of Sunbelt there? Sure.
And so it was interesting to be kind of, with the foot on both sides of the transaction. So it was a little strange. And the previous owner stuck around. He still comes in a few days a week, 6 years later, mostly to torment me. I think he takes great pleasure in that. So people that know him will appreciate that as well. Mm-hmm. But we had a cutoff date, where it was like, hey, here's what's going to happen. It was like a deal that we do with our clients, right? Where here's the effective date and here's why and how and money moves around and now you're responsible kind of thing. And so just kind of picked up the torch and really tried to maximize the transition and training period that I had with him on getting my feet underneath me and running the practice. And I'd come actually from my businesses were very employee driven, and this is very independent contractor driven, and so the team dynamics and some of those things where I was not only the youngest, but the least experienced person in the whole firm, made for some awkward, kind of conversations, but we transitioned really great. Nobody ran off, buildings didn't burn down, all the things. So, but it was good. And I'd been around small business all my life. So it wasn't, a lot of the mechanics of running a business were not a big deal.
Yeah. When you first took over as managing director, I'm sure you had some lofty goals, as all business owners do when they first buy that business. What were some of those goals, if you remember them, and how have they changed over time as you sit here today as an experienced managing director and business broker? Because you are. But,
You do one deal and suddenly you're an expert, right?
you
Uh, I really tried to adhere to the advice from the seller or the brokers involved, where you really don't want to change anything for as long as you can, just to kind of you've got this machine and it's part of what you're buying and all those things. And so we really tried to tweak some things. So that was 2019, right? So 6 months in, COVID hits, right? And so if anything, that changed a lot of how we did things, because the firm was still very much in the mindset of, hey, we know what works, and what was working at the time was, lots of in-person meetings and paperwork and, kicking down the doors and making calls and those kinds of things, where we really upped our technology game in 2020 because, we had to keep track, at least in our opinion. All of our deals fell off the table. We ended up having a year that was financially fine. It was only off by about 10% at the end of the year, which we were really thankful for. And we think that was just because we pivoted really quickly into all the to us, it was new technology with the video calls and DocuSign. My guys were thought DocuSign was, a miracle, in digital format, kind of thing. So, and some things like that. So that was kind of the first year and a half was, just kind of reacting to that. Since then, my goal, we had a bunch of lone wolves and still do, it's kind of our practice within a practice. I've really tried to bring in more of a collaboration, team spirit, if you will. We've been looking for some, I say younger brokers, but, less old brokers, to come on board and bring a little bit of that with them as well. Just because I think it's always benefits our clients, the more people that can collaborate on a project.
Yeah. Now we run that team approach well, and it helps with the clients when you get going. So let's kind of talk about scaling and running a business broker firm, right? What were some of the key factors that helped you really grow and take on the business and take over ownership in those first couple of years? COVID year excluding, where that was a survival year, right? What are some of the factors that have helped you grow the firm over the last few years?
Sure. And we really have, I want to say, you think I'd keep better stats, but I think we've had 3 of the best years of the firm in the last 30 years and in the last 5 years. So it's really been a productive time period here. And of course, I'd like to take all the credit for that. But I really think that team approach and bringing on some new folks and kind of shaking things up a little bit was beneficial, just with the new blood, if you will. Kind of helped everybody kind of re-engage and get more excited about what they do. My team, they skew a little older, a little more retired, that kind of thing. So they're not always necessarily as motivated as somebody like me with, kids and a mortgage in college and, all this stuff, So there's a little bit of, you can bring some energy to the table, then, I think that made the biggest difference on some of that.
So you hit earlier on one of the big pieces of advice that we as business brokers give to new owners walking in is don't change your thing day one. Run it as long as you can, learn the process. So when did you decide to make that first major change or that first major hire? And what did that look like in your practice?
That's a great question. So we actually kind of shifted from some bodies in the building who, they ended up going on to do other things or moving to be closer to family or whatever, and kind of moving into a little bit more technology. And I say that like it's some futuristic thing. I mean, we finally kind of used the CRM and, some things like that. And it was our efficiency got a lot better. But the team was just, terrified that, oh my gosh, I've got to use a different form, or I've got to get that off of the cloud drive rather than, get a printed copy off the wall in the office, copy room kind of thing, And I know that sounds goofy, but we became so much more, the ability to process more buyers and get through more listings. And we were so much better at due diligence, and just kind of all the things just got better. And so for us, it's like, hey, if we do these things right here, then we're going to get to the closing table a lot faster, and the old time kills deals. You want to eliminate that as best as you can.
Now, I would, for brokers that are out there today who have not done some sort of automation around their buyer process, That's the block. I mean, the buyer inquiries are coming fast and furious, and I don't know how those brokers are managing that process today if they're still going the old school. I think you kind of hit on it, but COVID forced a lot of brokers, us included, to really ramp up that technology piece and kind of come into what was probably standard operating procedure for most businesses out there, but the business brokerage industry wasn't there yet. So what are some of those systems or processes that have been most critical that have allowed you to grow and become more efficient?
Sure, and I do need to caveat some of this. We have almost a weekly argument, close to fist fight, over how to handle buyer inquiries, right? Just because there's some strong feelings on how to do that. And I don't think there's a wrong answer. It's kind of whatever suits you, and at least the way we do it at Sunbelt. Hey, if that's how you want to run your individual practice, then great. So. And I'm divided on it, and I treat some of my listings differently, to be honest. Some of them kind of get the fully automated deal where we use our CRM, which is Tupelo, to just process the inquiries, and you get the NDA out there, and the buyer profile comes in, and if that all looks well, then out goes the SIM, and it just kind of happens, right? And it's from that aspect, it's a really efficient way to get people information. At the same time, I have some clients that I really need to be more, conscious of their confidentiality, or making sure I know who the buyers are that we're talking to. And so we'll put stops in place to where there's some level of review by somebody before information gets shared, just to try to make sure that we're dealing with somebody that's not filling out their buyer profile, or, maybe is in the industry, or just, all those things. So it's helped. But like I said, we still debate about it internally on what's appropriate to talk to all those buyers first and really spend all that time, right? We've only got so much of it. So.
I think that is a big piece of, being flexible in our industry, right? There is no standard operating procedure. There's a book of how we would like to do everything and like to run every process, but every transaction, every deal tweaks a little bit. So the flexibility of it might not fit is a great way to run a brokerage.
If I had a penny even for all the times I've started a sentence with, well, it depends. There is no absolute in our industry. There's a let's have a discussion. Yeah, if you're looking for the flip chart, if then kind of thing, you're in the wrong space.
Let's transition a little bit into how you guys structurally work deals. So how do you, as an owner, balance working on personal transactions versus the team, and what flows to them versus to you? How do you manage that process?
Sure. I wish it was a bigger problem, to be honest with you. I'll jump ahead a little bit here, but when I recruit a new broker or talking to somebody about coming over to Sunbelt, one of my I try to scare them away from the industry, just because, you've got to be eyes wide open onto the mess you're getting into, right? It's a great profession, by the way. Sunbelt, or at least my office, we're not a lead generation machine. So I wished I could promise brokers, hey, I'm going to give you 10 people to talk to every week, and they're good, qualified leads, and just all the things, right? So we don't really do that. So we're not as good at it as I want to be. But the leads we do generate, we do try to kind of qualify here in the office and then hand them out to appropriate brokers. We don't have a real hard and fast system on how we do that, because it depends. And, we try to make a good match, and give folks good leads. For me personally, I've just got a sphere of influence where some projects come in that the expectation is just kind of, I need to work on it. And so those are the deals I do internally. And I have a hard time sometimes convincing my team, like, I promise this one wasn't a phone call. I know these people, so that's kind of how I do it internally. But, because I want my team to be successful, if they come on board and spend the time and energy and effort, I want to do what I can to support their lead generation or ability to bring on some listings and do some deals.
We joke in our firm, because we have the same process. We have multiple brokers, that if I'm taking the lead on a transaction, it's probably a problem child. And it's the one that nobody else wanted, and we probably shouldn't have brought on. You hit on, bringing on brokers to the firm and stuff like that. So let's kind of transition to you building a strong brokerage team and what that looks like. What training and support do you provide new business brokers as they come on to work with you?
Sure. So, specific to that, we have a little plan, so we have some support from our franchisor, right? They've got a whole pretty good library of training that they provide. We have a little internal designation and some things like that. So, so I've got kind of a list of, hey, here's some things that, and depending upon kind of where you are with what you know about the industry. If you don't know anything about anything, then that's one thing. And maybe your strength is in sales, maybe it's the financial piece, maybe it's the whatever, right? So I do try to tailor it to, hey, I don't want to make you watch something about stuff that you already know, right? And then I've got I think 8 topics that we'll go over that are probably more specific to either Sunbelt or just kind of our philosophy here or how our office works, and we really do kind of believe, hey, if you can get into this box at our firm, then you'll get this deal done. So and here's what that box looks like. So that's the training we go through. We've brought on folks that maybe don't know much about financial statements, so we focus on that a lot. Maybe some folks who aren't strong on the sales side of it, and so we focus on kind of, hey, here's how that process works. And so those are the different pieces we hit on, and then we try to use some resources in the industry to help us with valuation pieces and prospecting and all those things, and get you up to speed on as much of that as as you want or can handle, and kind of move it from there. Real quick side note on the training piece of it. I've learned a hard lesson the last couple of years and I kind of feel responsible for maybe some folks not being as successful as they could have been because they weren't devoting enough. It's not necessarily an amount of time, but if Sunbelt and business brokering is not their priority for maybe income generation or however you want to frame that, it just doesn't seem to work at our firm with the way we move brokers into being knowledgeable enough to kind of operate on their own. So that's something I've really focused on lately is, hey, you got to know all the terrifying things about getting into this business so you can say, yes, I'll do it. Yes, I still want to do it and then show up, So
it is one of these interesting industries where there's not a lot of people in it, and the barrier to entry at face value isn't that big. It's just sales. But when you really start diving into it, and the fact that this is, if you're lucky, you'll get a check in your first year if you're lucky. And we do the same thing at Lion, where we tell people, well, this is a horrible industry, and if you're not prepared, you will fail. And we see you were the past chapter president in Houston. I was the past chapter president in Austin, and I can't tell you how many new brokers would come in, try the industry, and you're like, hey, and just you hit on it. They're like, well, I'm doing this on the side, or I'm doing some other sort of sales while I try to hop in the industry. And you're just like, okay. And 3-4 months later, you never see them again. And the bringing on new brokers to the industry is really, really hard to do, which kind of leads to our next question here is, what do you look for when bringing on a new broker, whether it be someone who is already brokering other places or someone who's going to be brand new to the industry?
Sure. Now I've got a checklist. It's probably 30 years old, that I kind of get people to go through, and some of it's kind of, a little weird, but if you get a no on any of these things, it's like, well, hang on for a second. But it's things like, have you filed your own tax return at any point? Do you know how to, can you use a computer? Some kind of basic stuff that seems odd, but it really has kind of helped. I get a little optimistic about folks, and if they think that this is a career for them, I really do want to support that option for them. But I definitely want to make sure that they know kind of some of the ins and outs if they haven't been around the space. Because I heard the same thing you just said was, well, I'm doing this, but I want to dip my toe into it or whatever. And it's like, well, you can't. There's not a toe dipping. It's the cannonball. It's. So I try to refer folks that kind of give that vibe off to, well, hey, let's do a referral deal, and that way, if you're out there and you're bird dogging some good leads and they turn into something, I can get you paid, but you don't have to really do anything, and I don't have to spend a tremendous amount of time and resources on getting you up to speed just to have you go, oh, this is really hard.
That's a great option that I haven't considered personally, because it's one of those things where, especially when you make friends. We've got younger kids, and so all that, and they go, what do you do? And it's this industry and this job, if you will, has been one of the greatest things for me. Like I truly believe I found my thing, and it's allowed me to coach the kids in sports and to be super active and do my own schedule. And so for me, it's one of the greatest industries ever. And people look at it and they go, what do you do? How do I get into that? And it is you tell them, look, it's go slam your head against the wall for a year and then you can come in. It's
Right.
So
we do require our brokers to have owned their own business at some point, though. Like if you, because it's one of those things, if you've never owned a business, then you don't know what you're talking about, so, I don't know the other way to say it.
Yeah. One of the key checkpoints for us when we're talking to people that we kind of hit up front is we ask about their personal finances. And some people look at you and be like, that's weird. And I'm like, look, you need to financially support yourself for a year. And that year transition time, it's a real thing in our industry. Now, some people get lucky and they walk in, they have a deal, they have a client or something like that. But we tell people in the interview process, like, you need to show me you can support yourself for a year. And it also goes for our clients, right? So I don't need someone who needs this deal to close to pay their rent, right? Like that's just, you don't want to put yourself in that situation, your clients in that situation. So it's a great rewarding industry, but it is a tough one to hop into. So.
And I use that same phrase. I can show you ways to make a little bit of money sooner, but I mean, it's not, and you're going to spend some money, so you cannot count on a dollar from this thing for a year,
Yep. Yeah. Let's kind of transition here and talk about marketing and growing a business brokerage firm. What has been your most effective or your go-to strategy for getting new listings?
Well, I keep waiting for the Texas Business Broker podcast to give me the answer to that, but
so that's why you're on today. We're not even doing a podcast. I just wanted to find out where you're getting your listings.
Right. So, our firm does, 20-ish deals a year is kind of our thing. And we look back every year and kind of go, where did our buyers come from? The ultimate buyers, and where did our sellers come from? And it's just a mixed match of things. There's not like here's where they are. So the way I talk to new brokers is like, hey, you got to be pushing things out a jillion different ways. You can't just focus on one thing. You can't really focus on all of them at the same time either. So we were doing all the stuff, right? We've got the social media, and our website's always being tinkered with, and we've got mailing campaigns going on. We've got a cold calling service. We've got, everybody's doing donut drops and Taco Tuesdays with the wealth advisors and the CPAs and anybody that's in our kind of, sphere of small business owners. Lots of Chamber of Commerce meetings. You can eat your way through a Chamber of Commerce membership if you don't know that already. But, so just kind of out there, anytime I, shake hands with the business owner, to me, it's worth doing. Right. So I know that's kind of a non-answer to your question, but, you can kind of got a little bit of it going out everywhere. And it's like everything else, it's relationships, and the majority of our, good listings come from, folks that we, already have a relationship with, and they get referred in, and they're like, hey, I understand you want to do this, go talk to these guys, and that's kind of the way it goes. So so just the more people you can meet, the bigger your contact list is, the it's a numbers game.
Now, I'm an ex-marketing guy myself, and so when I get the marketing calls from people, they always get mad at me. I go, no, our marketing approach is networking. Right. It's sponsoring happy hours. It's doing this. We do the other stuff, but it's getting out there and networking. And that's really how you grow and get the difference in the great listings versus the listing where you're like, oh man, what just happened? So
we've threatened a number of times, and we're not courageous enough to do it, but to turn off every single channel of marketing we do and only spend 3 days a week going out and seeing those small groups of referral partners. And that's it. Spend all our money and time on those guys. But we haven't had the courage to do it yet.
You there. There's still a few things where you're like, why are we spending money here? Just because 5 years ago we got a deal out of it. So
it only takes one.
How has your overall marketing approach shifted from when you took over the firm to now? Is there more of a cohesive strategy, or is it still just kind of you're out there doing stuff?
Yeah, I'd like to think there's a little bit of a strategy. I mean, we do have a third-party marketing firm now that we're engaged with, and so I believe, at least to a degree, our firm kind of puts out a consistent, branded message that people kind of get used to a cadence on, whether that's good or bad. But and we try to kind of make things cohesive as best we can with look and feel, and maybe industry of the month or something like that. So I'd like people to walk in, kind of go, I feel like I already know you, or where you're coming from, or what you're doing. It was what we really kind of, the goal was, and just to be more consistent about it, because you get caught up on working on getting a deal to closing or due diligence or something, and all of a sudden you look and man, I haven't called anybody in 2 months or whatever. It's like, so that just the cadence of doing something has kind of been probably the biggest thing since I've been here.
Nice. You kind of hit on industry of the month. There's a movement for people to specialize in our industry. There's a push kind of from industry leaders top down saying, hey, you should specialize or have a niche. And then also a lot of times when we're talking to clients, do you specialize in my industry, right? We get that question all the time. Does anyone in your firm specialize in an industry, or does your firm specialize in an industry or deal size or service type or anything like that?
Well, I mentioned earlier, once you do a deal, you're an expert, right? No, I'm kidding. It's a little bit on purpose, but it's also just kind of a little bit of maybe some background, so when I was talking about when prospects come in, maybe we try to match them up with a broker. We've got a guy in our office that has done just loads of, landscaping and, those type of businesses. And so when somebody comes in, like, man, you got to talk to David, because he's our, he's so familiar with that industry. And we get some automotive services. We've got a couple guys that they've done so much in that space that, expert, I don't know, but they know a lot about it. They know the players, they know how it works. They can talk the language with the seller. There should be a comfort level there, which is why we try to match that up. We kind of shift that question, at least for us. At Sunbelt, we say, hey, our niche or our industry is we embrace being small business brokers. We're not trying to tell you that we're doing the lower middle markets. We can, we've got several large deals closing this year, so there's not like a lack of skill, but man, our sweet spot sure is working with, because I get that sometimes too. Hey, am I big enough for you? It's like, well, probably. So, we just kind of own that. Hey, we've done enough deals and we've got an experienced enough team. There's very, very rare that somebody comes in here that we're not familiar with your space, at least somehow, some way, in some form.
Perfect. Let's kind of switch as we start to wrap up here to industry trends, because we talked about, there is a shift with people saying, hey, you should niche. And if you go to the IBBA conference, there's a couple of speakers that, hit on just restaurants or just dental or just this. And there's some guys who make a really good living. The top producer 2 years ago was a vet specialist, right?
Yeah, I like that presentation. Yeah.
But so what are some of the larger trends or things that you see shaping the business broker industry as a whole right now?
Well, I certainly see that. Our franchise model, just in general, not just my office, but just kind of in general, is this small business approach, generalist, especially since I'm kind of geographically limited to a degree as well. So we've got to be mindful of that, but definitely see the industry thing happening. I think just the awareness of the industry is growing with your consumers, with your sellers and buyers, which I actually think is great, because I think the rising tide lifts all boats kind of thing. So 10 years ago, or even 6 years ago, you could walk in, and if you could convince a seller that that the business brokerage world actually existed, you had them as a client. And I'm running into more and more, but I'm going to go visit with 3 people, which I think is great, because it gives people even more confidence if they select you to be their representative. And it also gives everybody a chance that's in the space to go, man, I really got to, perform and do my job at the highest level to give these guys the right level of service to continue to do this, So I think it makes the business brokerage industry better. I think it gives people more choices. And so I just like that, TAB has always been focused on education and those kinds of things. But I really think, just the public awareness of this space, and it not being equated to being a used car salesman, It's, we're professionals and we're smart and we know what we're doing. And I still run up against strategic buyers and private equity groups that just, the business brokers here, whatever. And, we end up doing a fantastic deal for our seller because they thought we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah. So. No, it's definitely, I think, a big positive and I've seen it over the last decade as well. When I came into the industry, nobody knew what a business broker was. Now, there's still people out there who don't.
Sure.
That is definitely shifting away to where people know what a business broker is, and you got to start actually differentiating yourself on how your firm practices, how you practice, and I agree. I think it's a great thing. You actually have to be good at business brokering today to get a great deal done, right? And so it's a positive for the industry.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, because people know better, and you can't just tell them, "Hey, this is how it works," and they go, "Okay." They've actually got some knowledge about it, which I think is fantastic.
Yeah. As we wrap up here, what advice do you have to that individual who is already a broker who's looking at branching out on their own, or the business owner who just exited and said, "Hey, I think I want to do this industry"?
Yeah.
Any advice between franchise, non-franchise, or someone who's looking at diving into this? Like, let's wrap up there.
Well, I mean, if you're going to get into the space, of course, you need to join a Sunbelt office. No. I'm not super, because the way I got into the industry, I haven't experienced other firms and those kinds of things. So our franchise is pretty, from top to bottom, is pretty loose on kind of processes and things. They're much like we treat our team of, hey, it's practice within a practice, and if that's how you want to do things, and as long as you're being appropriate, then great, Mm-hmm. So I like that, but we also have a brand that I think people recognize, and if you're going in on your own, that's just lots of people just think, I'll get a website and a business card and go to the Chamber of Commerce and everything will be great, and man, having a name that people already know and as frustrating it is sometimes to not know how they know your name, or they don't know how they know your name, it's at least you've got that kind of penetration into the marketplace where, I've heard of you guys, it's like, okay, great, So that's just a huge thing that I think some people that start a business, no matter what business it is, don't realize that can be a huge thing. Some of the processes and things are great. I'm sure you have this too. Every franchisee, though, at some point is like, well, I don't really need the franchisor anymore, but I'm still sending them all that money.
Mm-hmm.
So there is that. But, I love firms like yours where you've got this presence now where, you've created that in and of yourself and you have your way of doing it and still have some of that control where you can make those decisions without having to worry about it. So, but I'm a team guy, so I like being part of a team and having a team. So it'd be hard for me to say, hey, go get a work suite and hang a shingle and go, when just being around other people to collaborate on and look at things and get different ideas and all that kind of stuff. Just, it's a 1 + 1 = 3 thing, in my opinion.
You hit on the having a brand now. It has taken us a while to build that brand. So I would looking back, as we are not a franchise, but looking back, what you just hit on of being able to walk in a room and someone knows what Sunbelt is versus your own independent brand, it takes a while to build that up. And we're just now seeing, I think, for our firm, the fruits of, I hopped on a call with a financial advisor in Dallas the other day. And they're like, Lion, I think I've heard of that. And it's only because we've had a guy up there in Dallas for the last 5 years. Yeah. So for those that are looking at it, look, you might want to give these franchises a second look. There is something to a franchise and having a brand, I guess.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, one caution on that, though, is you'll end up saying, maybe with you too, you sign some pretty, can be restrictive non-competes, and some of the bigger firms will really hold you to task on that. So you're going to want to like the folks you're dealing with and like the system and like all those things before you just kind of make a commitment like that. It's a big deal, which is why I'm also probably not the best recruiter, because I'm like, this is a big deal and you should really think about it. It's terrible.
I've talked more people out of joining the industry than I have talked to into coming. So
for sure.
Hey, so Dan, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today. I appreciate you helping me just dive into the industry and do a little inside baseball here with what it looks like to being a business broker, insight into Sunbelt Texas. If anyone is looking to connect with you further, how do they get a hold of you in your office?
Sure, you shouldn't have to try too hard, I hope. But yeah, sunbelttexas.com is our website. You can find me on LinkedIn and all the other things. And hey, we sure appreciate you, Josh, and all the work you put into the industry, not just in Austin, but in the state. And I'm sure we'll see you on the national stage at some point too.
I am speaking at IBBA later this year. So
I told you.
All right. Well, that is a wrap for this episode of the Texas Business Broker. If you found any value in today's conversation, be sure to like and subscribe, and don't miss any future insights from industry experts like Dan. Also, if you have a topic that you would like us to cover or discuss, or a guest suggestion, please reach out. I'd love to hear from you. Until next time, keep closing deals and making an impact on businesses here in Texas. Thank you for listening.